Resistance report. I apologize. We had some technical difficulties. Many of you said you couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? Is that okay? I can't see all of you out there. Just put up your hand if you can hear me. All right? Yeah. Okay. It looks pretty good. I was just lip syncing a moment ago, and so now this is the official resistance report for June 27th, 2017. Good evening. Mitch McConnell, I was saying just a moment ago, when you didn't hear what I was saying, is delaying a vote in the Senate on his version of Trumpcare, and he's doing it because he just doesn't have the votes. If you are heading the Senate, you are not going to have a vote unless you actually have enough votes. So he was counting noses, and a lot of Republicans either thought that the bill went too far in getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, or didn't go far enough in terms of getting rid of the Affordable Care Act. That first group that worried that it went too far, they became even more worried when the Congressional Budget Office yesterday said that 22 million Americans would lose their health care. And you remember, Donald Trump said that the House version that took away health care for 23 million Americans was mean, quote unquote. And so if the Senate version takes away health care for 22 million, well, that's almost as mean, isn't it? And today, a lot of Republicans, predictably, this is what they did last time when the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, came out saying 23 million people would lose under the House version. A lot of Republicans today started attacking the Congressional Budget Office. I just want to remind you, it's important that you know this. If you're a Republican, or if you know a Republican who's saying something like this, make sure they know as well that the Congressional Budget Office is nonpartisan. Not only is it nonpartisan, but it's also, its head is appointed by Republicans in the House and the Senate, because they control the House and the Senate. And so for them to attack the Congressional Budget Office is just like attacking the messenger. You don't like the bad news. The reality is that the 22 million people that would lose their health care, that's a conservative estimate, because the time frame, and we went into this a little bit last night, but the time frame that the Congressional Budget Office was using was the next 10 years, and a lot of Mitch McConnell's bill is backloaded to have tremendous damage after 2025, 2028, eroding Medicaid, and that was not even reflected in the Congressional Budget Office. So it's much worse than the Congressional Budget Office talked about. Now, this delay that Mitch McConnell, not having the vote this week, this is it's a major victory for America. It's a major victory for poor and disabled and elderly Americans. It's a major victory for a lot of blue-collar Americans. It's also, not incidentally, a major victory for Democrats, who held fast in the House and in the Senate, and they were not in any way intimidated. They just kept the pressure on and kept the heat on, which is what confuses me, to be quite frank, because I have heard nothing over the last day. In fact, I've heard nothing over the last week from Democrats except complaints about Democrats, about the Democratic Party, about the Democratic leadership, about well, first of all, I think it stems from John Ossoff losing in the 6th District of Georgia, the 4th special election that Democrats have lost. But, you know, these complaints that Democrats, this self-flagellation that Democrats go through about losing these kinds of elections is absurd. These are all red, ruby red Republican districts. The fact that Democrats did as well as Democrats did in these districts should make us quite pleased with how the Democrats are performing relative to what Democrats normally do in these districts. And certainly the anti-Trump message is, to a large extent, getting through. Again, remember, these are Republican districts. They've been electing Republicans for years. Also, I keep hearing that some of the recommendations coming from leading Democrats like Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Democratic advisor Bruce Reed, they say the Democratic Party really needs to move to the center. It needs to appeal to suburban swing voters. It needs to sort of become Republican light. Now, I've heard the same thing from these so-called New Democrats for years, and this is exactly what they have said that's what they were saying 10 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 25 years ago. And their notion of the Democratic Party moving to the right, moving to the center, is exactly wrong. It's one of the reasons Democrats have got into the fix that Democrats are in. Because if you become Republican light, why would anybody vote for you when they can get the real thing? And as the Republicans over the last 20, 30, 40 years continue to move right, the center, moving to the center means moving to the right. And that's the problem for the Democratic Party. It needs to talk about the future. It needs to talk about an affirmative view. It can't just be anti-Trump. And this gets into the 2018 midterm elections as well. Democrats cannot succeed by only being anti-Trump. Of course, we have to be anti-Trump to a large extent, but Democrats also need an affirmative message that responds to the biggest reality that most Americans are experiencing and have experienced over the last 25, 30, 35 years, and that is stagnant wages, where most of the economic gains have gone to the top. American workers are less and less secure. It's not just that the wages are stagnant, but they have less job security than ever before. And inequality of income and wealth and political power keeps on widening. Now, Democrats ought to be, this is what the Democrats have been since Franklin D. Roosevelt. This has been a Democratic theme. This has been a Democratic goal to overcome these kinds of inequalities of income and wealth and political power that goes with widening inequalities of income and wealth. And if Democrats don't seize the moment now, and not just go after Donald Trump, yes, go after Donald Trump, but also come up with an affirmative set of ideas and programs and projects and, well, let me give you an example. Take healthcare. Now, over the last weeks and months, obviously, Democrats have had to hold on to and defend the Affordable Care Act, and that's good, and that's necessary. And over the next weeks or months, Democrats have to continue to defend the Affordable Care Act. I mean, the Affordable Care Act, let's be clear, is not perfect. It is, though, it's a major step in the right direction. Over 20 million additional Americans have got health care coverage because of it. And so it's obvious that Democrats have to defend the territory that Democrats have gained, and also, more importantly, the people who have now health care who didn't have it before. Health care is expensive. It's one of the reasons that widening inequality of income and wealth and political power have taken such a toll. But Democrats need to go further on health care and offer Americans a positive vision of where the nation should be headed on health care over the longer term. What is that? It is Medicare for all. It's a single payer. Now, let me just give you some background, because I don't want to get too caught in the weeds here, but you need to understand this background in order to make the case. And we all need, you and I and everybody needs to push the Democratic Party, not just to oppose Trump, that's easy, but to actually go further than that, like Medicare for all. Now, the background. America's spending on health care per person is more than twice the average per person health care spending in all of the advanced economies of the world. All 35 advanced economies, they all belong to the Organization for Economic and OECD. Well, all 35 have far lower healthcare costs than we do. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They all have lower costs than we do for healthcare. We are twice as expensive, and we get much worse outcomes, health outcomes, than they do. We have, our lives are shorter. We have more chronic illnesses than any other advanced nation. Americans are sicker. Look at that combination. You can't look at that combination of twice as high per person healthcare costs and worse healthcare outcomes without thinking that there is a better alternative. Now, again, the Affordable Health Care Act is a step in the right direction, but Democrats need to put in front of the public Medicare for all as the direction we need to go in. Now, why is medical care so expensive in other countries, so less expensive? Why is it so expensive here? Why is it so cheap in other countries? Why is it the case that a lot of other countries, people get preventive health care and they don't see their doctors in the United States because it's so expensive? Well, there are four reasons why health care is so expensive here and why it is so inexpensive every place else. Number one, those other countries, their governments negotiate lower rates with healthcare providers because the government really is the single payer. So in France, for example, the average cost of a magnetic resonance imaging exam is $363. In the United States, the average cost is $1,121. In France, just to take France as an example, an appendectomy costs $4,463. Here, it costs $13,851. Now, they get lower rates because they cover everyone, so they have a huge amount of bargaining power with providers. That's number one. Number two, other nations also do not have to pay the cost of private insurers shelling out billions of dollars a year on advertising and marketing, most of which is spent by private for-profit insurers in order to avoid sick people and find healthy people. Can you imagine? We have a healthcare system. We're the only healthcare system in the world designed to avoid sick people. Thirdly, nor do other nations have to pay boatloads of money to the shareholders and to the executives of big for-profit insurance companies. And fourth, and finally, they don't have to bear the high, what are called administrative costs. I mean, this is basically the cost of the paperwork, the billing, the oversight, because in the United States, you've got these for-profit insurance companies that have got to make sure that the providers are filing exactly right, and there are all kinds of different systems of billing, and you've got, it's nuts. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, Medicare's administrative costs, now this is important, this is very basic, Medicare's administrative costs are only about 2% of operating expenses. Only 2% of operating expenses. That's less than 1/6 of the administrative costs of America's private health insurers. Now, you see the difference? If we had Medicare for all, we would all be so much better off. Now, to make matters even worse for Americans, our nation's private for-profit health insurers are merging like mad. They're consolidating like mad in order to suck up even more money from consumers and taxpayers by reducing competition. At the same time, their focus on attracting healthy people and avoiding sick people creates this vicious cycle in which, to the extent that they actually have sick people and they have not filtered out the sick people, they have sick people, they have got to charge more in terms of raising premiums, co-payments, deductibles, which means that a lot of poor people or people who are sick can't afford it, which means that they can't even get any preventive care, which makes them even sicker. And to tell you the truth, this is a phenomenon that has even affected the exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, this vicious cycle. So Medicare for all would solve these problems, folks. Get lower prices, better care, And it would be financed the same way that Medicare and Social Security are financed. The two most popular government programs ever created. They are financed by the payroll tax. So all you need is to raise payroll taxes, have the rich pay more, higher rate, provide more of the financing with regard to the payroll taxes. But everybody wins because the total cost of health care would be far lower and outcomes would be far better. This is really important. Now, if Republicans succeed, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, if they succeed in gutting the Affordable Care Act or in subverting it, Donald Trump is actively trying to sabotage the Affordable Care Act right now. So even if Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan don't actually repeal it, Donald Trump and the Trump administration are well on their way to trying to do everything they possibly can to make these exchanges, these health exchanges under the Affordable Care Act, not work. And that's subversion. So even if they'll succeed, let's assume that either by repealing or by subverting, they make the Affordable Care Act as essentially repealed. Under those circumstances, the American public is faced with a very stark choice. Expensive health care for a few, or affordable and more effective health care for the many. Which side do you want to be on? Which side should Democrats be on? It's low-hanging fruit. A Gallup poll conducted in May found that a majority of Americans would support a single-payer system like Medicare for all. A majority of Americans. Another poll by the Pew Research Center shows that such support is growing, with 60% of Americans now saying government should be responsible for ensuring health care coverage for all Americans. That's up from 51% last year. So, my message to Democrats is don't listen to the negative nabobs of negativism who say, no, you got to move to the center and Democrats have got to be Republican light. No. Seize the day. Don't merely defend the Affordable Care Act, but go on the offensive with Medicare for all. That's the big framing issue tonight. And now your questions. Susan Hines, do you think the Republican Senate is taking a page from the Republican House? Will they try to make this bill look dead only to revive it and rush it through? Susan, I think that's exactly what they're planning to do. I think Mitch McConnell and Republican leadership in the Senate, they are going to, as soon as press coverage dies down, as soon as it's sort of quiet, we're in the summer, people don't know what's going on, I wouldn't be surprised if Mitch McConnell called the Senate back into session and boom, had a vote on this in the dead of night. Next question. Penny Jenkins, if the Republican offerings are so bad, why aren't the Democrats offering up better solutions? Well, Penny, that's exactly what I got into in the main part of this little program of ours. How do we get Democrats to start acting and not reacting? Well, the way to do that is you have got to do it. When you ask me a question about how to get Washington to do something or Democrats in Washington to do something, my response back to you is you have got to do it. You probably don't remember, but in 1936, Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for a second term, and somebody came up to him and said, Mr. President, if you get reelected, I want you to do this and this and this and this. And he turned to her and he said, ma'am, if I get elected, I would love to do all of that, but you must make me. Same thing now. You want the Democrats to be more visionary and take a more aggressive approach and push Medicare for all. Well, we have got to make sure that our Democratic representatives and senators know how strongly we feel about this. Linda Granelli, why aren't Republicans afraid to be associated with this health care bill? Is gerrymandering so effective that they have to worry about being reelected? Well, I guess your question is, why are Republicans afraid? Well, they are afraid because a lot of Republicans are worried about Donald Trump's unpopularity. That's the wild card here for Republicans. Every member of the House is up for re-election in 2018. Next year, a third of the Senate is up for re-election. Not quite that many Republican senators, unfortunately, are up for re-election. But the point is that they feel, their pollsters are telling them they already know because they've had town halls, they've been confronted by many people like you, and they know that things are a little bit wild out there and unpredictable out there, and Donald Trump's popularity keeps plummeting, and so they're nervous. And they're nervous about activism. They're nervous about your activism. There are a lot of independents that are going to be voting, and they could go in any direction. Mary Yin, what has happened to Trump's cruel budget proposal? Why are we not hearing more? We will hear more, Maury. I mean, that budget proposal is still out there. As soon as health care is done, one way or another. And remember, you need the Senate to pass something, and then it goes to the conference committee of the House and the Senate. House has already passed this draconian, horrible health care bill to replace, they say, doesn't replace, to repeal Obamacare and undermine Medicaid. It goes to the conference, and then it goes back to the House and Senate for final votes. Until that happens, they don't want to stir up the water anymore. So there will be, next on the agenda, will be Trump's budget and a big tax cut for the wealthy and for big corporations. Tommy Martin, what are you reading for fun this summer? This is the last question. Tammy, I have been actually reading, I tend to read several books at the same time. One book that I am reading is a book about Winston Churchill's wife. And I find it just fascinating. I find Winston Churchill fascinating, and I like to read about his wife because she is an incredible character. I wish I had the book with me because I wish I didn't know that you would be asking that. This is also a book that I'm now reading. This is called The Reagan Legacy. Can you see it? Yeah. It's written by and edited, actually. It's a collection by Sidney Blumenthal and Tom Edsel. It is really, really, really interesting, particularly seen through the eyes of where we are right now. And next time we get together, I'll even suggest some other summer reading for you. I'll be prepared. In the summer schedule that we have, I am not going to be doing the Resistance Report every evening. I will see you next Wednesday. I think, yes, next Wednesday. So I want you to have a safe and good 4th of July. We're going to put up some new videos. We're going to repost some videos, and the videos hopefully are going to be useful to you. But one of the videos that we have worked on is about the real meaning of patriotism and the difference between Trump's view of patriotism and what patriotism really ought to be, the real patriotism. I hope you pay attention, and I hope it's useful to you. More importantly, I want to thank Sasha Lightman and Andrew Santana. Can you see the names who've been enormously helpful behind the scenes? Thank all of you for continuing to fight the good fight, and I'll see you next